Oh, Carrie's there. Hey, Moses. Oh, you got it. I'm muted. Hi, I'm Kathy Huddleston. I'm a member of the Adult Ed Committee, and we're going to be starting our class here in just a moment. So if you want to find a place to sit, preferably near the front. Well, welcome everyone. We are going to be having a little discussion time about a challenge that the church has. The Presbyterian Church USA has decided, I think very good idea, that all the churches should consider having an anti-racism policy, just like we have policies about other social issues. And Session has been considering this. We have a small policy committee that's been working on drafts that would then go to session. But we really feel like this is something that the entire church should be aware of. And also part of our anti-racism effort is education of the entire church and discussion among everyone so that we all know what that means and how we can be more effective at addressing issues of racial justice and how we can be a more welcoming church. So I have some copies up here of a draft racial justice policy that we're going to be discussing, but the first thing I want to do is I'm going to play a video, and it's about 20 minutes, and this is my daughter Karen's church in Palo Alto, First Presbyterian of Palo Alto, and I was down there on Pentecost, and their minister, Tom, gave a really great sermon about this topic as his way of introducing this issue to their community, because they were also doing an anti-racism policy. And when I was there, I thought it was such a great message that I just wanted to share it with our church first, and it should give you a lot of idea about what this whole topic's about and why we want to do it. So I just want to start by playing that, and then I'll hand out these draft policies, and then we can have a little discussion. So want to go ahead and play that, Moses?
They are worthwhile, that they are children of God, and that they belong. That's the miracle of Pentecost. Some people think Pentecost is they started speaking in tongues, like the ecstatic prayer language that nobody can understand except the person who's experiencing it. That's not what's described in Acts 2. It's described as they were given the ability to speak in other languages that help the people around them belong. So it seems fitting today that we talk about language. And we talk about language in terms of how do we, in a modern context, speak about race, this thing that divides so many of us and makes some of us feel like we don't belong. So let's start this primer with the word race itself. What is race? What race are you? It's easier to say what it is not. Race is not a biological reality. There is no such thing in biology as a white person. There is no such thing in biology as a black person or an Asian person. And even the terms that we have for race are confusing. Hispanic, Latino, Asian, South Asian, maybe by the name of the country, Filipino. We have all these different things. Geography, African American, it's geography and history together. What is race exactly? It's not any of those things by itself. We've all seen world maps too. When I was a kid, I always thought, why are they calling Europe and Asia two different things? It's clearly the same landmass. And it really looks like Europe is a peninsula of Asia. I think Europeans should really be called West Asians, is what we should do. Because there's no biological or geographical line that we can draw that separates and saying, okay, here, this race stops here, and now a new race starts. It doesn't work that way. And yet, even as race is not real, it's very real. One way that we describe how it's real and not real is we call it a social construct. That race exists because we all agree that it exists. Yet social construct is a kind of neutral term. And Ibram X. Kendi, in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, speaks to that in his definition. He offers a more precise definition of race than just a social construct. He says race is a power construct. It's a power construct of collected and merged differences that live socially. Because calling race a social construct is too neutral, and race is not neutral. It's created and it's enforced by power. So it's a power construct. So it doesn't matter in some ways how you identify. If you identify as one thing, but those in power, those with the ability to control our bodies and have power over us with violence, decide that you're something else, then that's how they're going to treat you. For instance, if a young man is driving, and let's say this young man, his skin color is the color of coffee with heavy cream, but he has tight, curly black hair, an afro, basically. But this young man could very easily have 2 white parents. He could very easily have 3 out of 4 white grandparents. So this young man may be in a family where he very much identifies as white. But if a police officer looks at him from behind or from the side and decides that he's black, then the chances are that police officer is going to pull him over at a higher rate than a white person. So the powers that be decide what he is, and that affects his life. The same is true for his teachers in school and how they treat him, because how they see him. The same is true for a security guard in a department store and whether they follow him or not. So even if he identifies as white, those in power decide what he is to them and treat him accordingly. In Tennessee in 1910 and other states, when they were trying to enforce segregation, they actually codified a law called the one drop of blood law. They were trying to decide, okay, who's black and who's white? How do we segregate people if we can't put them in a category? And they created a law that said, if a person has 1 drop of African blood, they're black. That's the extent that we'll go to try to divide and separate each other. Race is a power construct. And that brings us to another term, and that term is whiteness. Who is white? We know that some groups in American history started out as not being white, and somehow they became white as American history progressed. The Irish were not considered white when they got here. Italians were not considered white. Jews were not considered white. And now all of those groups are considered white. How did they do that? Well, it turns out, according to Noel Ignativ, a historian, when it comes to the Irish, one of the things that they did that moved them into the white category was they started committing violence against black people. So in the Civil War in the North, when they created the draft for the Civil War, Irish mobs started blaming black people for the draft and started committing acts of violence against black people. And then white people saw that and started to move Irish over into the white category, which is so disturbing if you think about it, because it means then that whiteness is defined by the ability of a person to commit violence against a non-white person and get away with it. That whiteness there is inherently violent in its definition. Richard Delgado and Jean Stefanik, in their book Critical Race Theory and Introduction, say that whiteness is a social and legal status conferred through laws, through norms, and through practices that bestow unearned advantages on a person. It's invisible to many who benefit from it, and it functions as a default and a norm. And that starts to bring us to another term, white privilege. In her essay, White Privilege, Peggy McIntosh, who's a white feminist scholar, describes whiteness as an invisible, weightless knapsack of unearned assets that only white people can count on every day. We shouldn't consider the things that the knapsack provides us are things that everybody should have. Everybody in the society should have the ability to be free and to not be targeted because of what they look like. But only white people enjoy that privilege. And so this invisible knapsack that white people get to carry around. Most people have been taught not to recognize that they have it on. And as a result, when they're challenged, they become fragile. And that brings up another phrase that you'll hear, in this conversation, white fragility. Author Robin DiAngelo, in her book, White Fragility, names it and describes it as white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial stress becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. If you're white and you're feeling uncomfortable with this conversation, you're experiencing this right now. And why should it make us uncomfortable to talk about race? Why should it make us uncomfortable to talk about whiteness? Because we know that there's this unfairness imbued in it, and we've been taught to not see it, and so it starts to become really uncomfortable when we bring it up. But Robin DiAngelo says that we have to remember it's not a personal failing. White fragility is not a personal failing. It's a predictable response shaped by a racially insulated environment. So if many white people have grown up in a predominantly white space where they have rarely had to confront or reflect on their own racial identity or its impact, then when it's threatened, that feels very new and very different. Their knapsack is being threatened and they didn't even know they were wearing it. Now, again, if you're starting to feel like you've done something wrong because you're white, I want to assure you, actually, guilt is not really the appropriate response for these feelings. I feel so guilty because I'm white. We don't need a bunch of guilty white people walking around. What we need are white people who recognize and see the advantages, who know that they have this knapsack on that's very hard to take off, in fact, and have to be conscious of how they respond. So if we look at a geographic metaphor maybe, and we realize that as white people, we might be standing at a higher elevation than other races in our country. And we don't think, oh, I feel so guilty that I'm up here. We're like, okay, so how are you going to respond? You didn't put yourself there. How do we respond? Do we go down? Do we help people up? What are we going to do? A lot of the things that we can do is use our voices. When we see something happening that's where our white privilege is being activated or somebody else is being targeted because they're not white, just speaking up in a board meeting, speaking up in a meeting at work can be a great way. Hey, I saw this, you wouldn't say this, I saw this person of color, just had a comment completely ignored. And now a white person's claiming credit for it. I just wanted to mention that this person over here said it first. I just want to lift them up because that was their idea and I want to name that. It's the things like that we can do. Okay, so let's move on to two more words. White space, which we mentioned in our anti-racist statement for the church, and we actually have to footnote it because it's a new word for many people. And in fact, it's helpful to pair white space with another term that you may have heard, code switching. Code switching is when a marginalized racial group changes their language, their tone, their dialect, their mannerisms, their references to make white people more comfortable. We define white space in our church's anti-racist statement as this. White space refers to physical, social, or institutional spaces that are predominantly white, where whiteness is treated as the norm, and people of color are absent or underrepresented or made to feel like outsiders. These spaces are spaces where whiteness is assumed to be the default identity, shaping expectations of behavior, speech, and belonging. When people of color enter white spaces, they may feel scrutiny, discomfort, or the burden of proving they belong. And that's where code switching happens. Now, the good news is that it doesn't take a lot of diversity to disrupt white space. We haven't quite achieved it in this church yet, but we're getting closer. A key marker of progress is that there is more than one family of a given group present on a Sunday morning. That's a milestone. When someone comes in and they see other people that look like them, it makes a difference. They might think, okay, though there's a good chance that at least that person may understand my culture, understand where I'm coming from, understand my experiences. And just having one or two other people can make a huge difference in disrupting white space. Maybe I'm not alone. Maybe I belong here. Now remember where we started, that the early church was born when the Holy Spirit gave the disciples the ability to help people feel like they belonged. So we don't need representation to make people feel and belong if we can do it within ourselves, if we have that gift. Okay, so last term, but I'm gonna take a little bit of time with it, is microaggressions. Now, this is a buzzword for sure, and it's not even universally agreed upon as an accurate term. It was coined by Harvard psychologist Chester Pierce in the 1970s, so it has been around for a while. He described microaggressions as commonplace verbal, behavioral, and environmental slights, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative attitudes towards members of a marginalized group. So in the context of our message today, I would say that microaggressions we communicate through our words that a person, you don't really belong here, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about the fact that you're not white and you're different. Now, Ibram Kendi is critical of the term microaggressions because he says they're not micro and they're more than just aggressiveness, they're violent. He says it's actually racist abuse of brown and black people that's neither minor or aggressive. So I have a video I want to show of kind of a funny, lighthearted example of microaggressions, and then we'll go to some more examples of microaggressions.
Hi there.
Hi.
Nice day, huh?
Yeah, finally, right?
Where are you from? Your English is perfect.
San Diego. We speak English there.
Oh, no, where are you from?
Well, I was born in Orange County, but I never actually lived there.
I mean before that.
Before I was born.
Yeah, like, where are your people from?
Well, my great-grandma was from Seoul.
Korean. I knew it. I was like, she's either Japanese or Korean, but I was leaning more towards Korean.
Amazing.
Yeah, Hamshasina. There's a really good teriyaki barbecue place near my apartment. So I actually really like kimchi.
Cool. What about you? Where are you from?
San Francisco.
But where are you from?
Oh, I'm just American.
Really? You're Native American?
No, just regular American. Oh, well, I guess my grandparents are from England.
Oh, well. Hello, Governor! What's all this then? Top of the morning to you. Let's get a small tea. Double, toil and trouble. Mind the gap, beware Jack the Ripper. Bloody hell! Pip, pip, cheerio! I think your people's fish and chips are amazing.
You're weird.
Really? I'm weird? Must be a Korean thing.
You speak good English. You are so articulate. When I look at you, I don't see color. Is that your real hair? You don't act Asian. You don't look Asian. You don't dress Asian. Are you a US citizen? What are you? You're so interesting looking. She's so exotic. How did you get your hair like that? And then another sort of category, and this one's harder, is not recognize, if you're a white person, not recognize someone that you've met before who's of another race. And this is especially hard because we don't want to be afraid to interact with people. But it's known that white people, when they look at people of color, do not always distinguish them from one another and will name them the wrong name. And that's very offensive. There was a wonderful, kind, older white man at my church in Baltimore. And I was speaking with a black woman who was a brand new visitor to the church, young black woman. And this man, Fred, came up and said, "Oh, hi, Anita, it's so good to see you." Now, Anita is another young black woman in the church that has been around for quite some time in that church. And I said, "Fred, this is not Anita, this is, Sharon." And the thing to do there is to say, "I am so sorry, it's so nice to meet you." but he doubled down. And he's like, you look just like Anita. I'm like, no, this is Sharon Fred, and she doesn't look like Anita. They're trying to move on. But to him, they didn't look like each other at all. They were both young black women, but they didn't look like each other. But to him, he was having trouble. Now, if we're in that situation, the key is just apologize and move on, right? Don't double down. Don't make a big issue of it. You made a faux pas. You did something that was offensive. Apologize and move on. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail more explaining all of this, but I hope you understand that the focus that we're going for is not on our differences, but on our commonalities. What are the things that make us human? You saw it in the video. The first thing he asked her was about the weather. That's a great place to start. Human beings love to talk about weather. Doesn't matter what culture you're from, we love to talk. I'll talk about the weather for 10 minutes if you want. You're great. Other things that we can talk about, especially if you're in a church setting, what did you think of the service today? What did you think of that sermon? What did you think of that choir piece? That was really something. Have you tried the snacks? The cherries are really fresh today. If they're a new visitor, where do you live in the neighborhood? Do you live close by? How did you hear about the church? If they have children, how old are your children? What are their names? If they mention they have older children, where do your children live? Do they live nearby? What do you do for fun? Do you like sports? A lot of people like sports, more than you'd think like sports. One of the things I learned in Baltimore is that all different kinds of people could talk about either the Orioles or the Ravens. You could talk to strangers about the Orioles or the Ravens, whether you're talking to persons of different social class, different races, different genders. Everybody could talk about the Orioles or the Ravens, so that's a commonality. What are you going to do for fun for the rest of the afternoon? All kinds of things. You get the idea. So here's the point. The point is that the miracle of Pentecost was that the early Christians found ways to, in the midst of a very diverse group of people, to communicate that everybody belongs. Everybody belongs here. It doesn't matter who you are, what language you speak, what you look like, where you come from. You are valued, you are worthwhile, you belong here. And they found a way to communicate that, and the church was born. That's the work that we are called to do when we're being anti-racist. There's a lot of other things that are involved with being anti-racist, but at its core, if we can communicate to everybody who walks in this door, you are valued, you are a child of God, you belong here, then we are being an anti-racist church. Amen.
So I think that it could apply equally to our church as to their church, of thinking through these issues and having a little bit more, I'll keep one, having a little bit more depth of understanding of what we're talking about and how it's really about welcoming and belonging and trying to make this church even better. And the more people in the church who understand what the goal is and how to do that, the more apt we are to be welcoming when a visitor comes in or to reach out to a diverse group of people. So Dan is passing out a statement. Why don't you, the very first paragraph on our proposed anti-racism statement is up on the screen here. And I have two microphones so that I can talk, but also so that people can comment and whatever thoughts you guys have. Are there any thoughts after just watching the video that you want to share?
I was immediately reminded of a story that I heard on the news. It was a year or two ago now, but it speaks so clearly to underrepresentation and what DEI programs really achieve when they work, because they didn't in this case. When I remember hearing a story when facial recognition software first came out and started to be used everywhere, that I don't remember if it was Apple or another company finally had to admit that they were having more problems with it among black people than among white people, because it turned out, surprise, surprise, the engineers that created the software were an overly white group. The people that they tested on, therefore, were an overly white group. And so they released this massively important piece of software that worked much better for white people than it did for black people.
I can certainly remember times when I've made those kinds of statements in the past. Not quite as bad as that guy, but, you know, asking people where they came from.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm sorry to skew, is that the right word? The path that we're on here, but I just wanted to mention a personal experience that I had. I was a VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, a VISTA volunteer, and I was assigned to South Central Los Angeles, which is between Watts and East LA. I was one of 2 Caucasian women in the whole community, because Watts and South Central Los Angeles are primarily black. And I guess I just wanted to mention that. It kind of veers away from what we're focusing on today. But I just had to mention what a wonderful experience I had there, because a lot of the VISTA volunteers were of mixed races too. So we were all kind of, lack of better terminology, well-schooled. But I remember how well I was treated in that community, because I was one of a handful of Caucasian women. And like the lady who lived across the street from me, she used to say to me, "Now, I'm keeping an eye on you. If I see anybody walk in front of your door, I'm going to get rid of them if they need to be gotten rid of." I mean, she was watching out for me, because being a Caucasian woman in an all-black community. But that experience just came to my mind in the type of thing we're talking about today. But I'm so glad for the positive, a lot of my VISTA volunteer friends were also of different races. And what a beautiful experience to have that year in that community.
Thank you, Jean. That was great. Alice, I think, has a comment.
Well, speaking of DEI, one person that makes my blood boil is Hegseth. He's whitewashed the Pentagon database, removing black Medal of Honor winners, and fired all the women military people in high ranks in the military.
So let me ask a question. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, even if we're not singers, but do you think it's a good idea for Southminster to have an explicit anti-racism effort policy? Is that something that as a congregation you feel is a good thing? Yay, I see a few hands going, yes. Good. What do you think? You have a copy of the policy that we're proposing, which I know you haven't had time to read it, but if you do have comments, I know Kirsten and all of us would love to know what your thoughts are on specifics. But I think we need to be like the mustard seeds in the congregation to kind of acknowledge the importance of this kind of effort and just be welcoming and just do our best to make the church a welcoming place. But do you have any comments? I thought, I was reading through this preamble after watching the video myself, and I thought it actually fits very well with the way Tom described the process. Described the point of it. Does this make sense to you? Any comments on it?
Well, I would make one comment when we talk about white people, and that seems to needs to have some sorts of expansive phrase, because he even addressed that. What is really white? It's a construct we use, and it's a power force. How do we differentiate between people that are considered white but may not be pure white, or whatever you want to call it?
Can you say a little more about that? Just talk a little bit more.
Well, I don't know how, I mean, who is white? And who does it include? And there may be people that consider themselves white that come from a different culture and a different way that may not even consider themselves to be white, but they might be part of the dominant force. I don't know how you differentiate.
So I think one of the things is talking about it benefits white people in the dominant culture while disadvantaging. So in other words, maybe a definition, if we're going to use words like white people, maybe have some definition in a little more explanation that it's a cultural construct, like what he talked about. That was a good way he put it. So maybe add a little bit more.
I haven't read this document. As with, I'm sure many of you, I started hearing about this and reading about this, and actually attended a workshop by Robin DiAngelo that was at First Unitarian Church downtown when I was a member there. At this point, I feel as if the fewer words are used, few words but clear words. Personally, I think that's preferable. So, for example, I think this introduction is wonderful. And in my opinion, rather than putting in more words to define white people, we could just say it benefits members of the dominant culture and not say white at all. Anyway.
I don't know that this needs to be in the statement, but just one of the things that helps me think about race is it's actually one piece of the social hierarchy that involves male and female and black and white and handicapped and abled. There's a whole ladder of statuses in our society where people claim advantage over others, and sometimes I just find it helpful to think about race as just one piece of that, and being anti-racist, I think, requires being anti-hierarchical, anti-patriarchal. I don't think you can separate that out.
Sorry to be making such simple comments here. But, what comes to my mind is that we are all children of God. Bottom line.
Good.
The church that I recently came from welcomed assistance to Ukrainian refugees. And it was just my observation that our task was a very simple one. And one of the reasons our welcoming them and nurturing them and sending them on their way into society was because they were like the perfect refugee family to the wider community, we didn't know when we signed up for it what they would be or where they would come from or what they would look like. But it occurred to me on many occasions that if they had been refugees from Africa, from Asia, we might have Palestine, we might have had a very different response, and that was sobering and disturbing.
I've been fortunate to have a lot of experiences. Another one was one of my best friends when I lived in Arizona. She was the state director for all the libraries in the state of, what did I say? Which I've lived in 9 different states. So I guess when I was in Phoenix, Arizona. But she comes to mind because here she was, the executive director of the state library for the whole state of Arizona. You know what she was doing? She was providing housing for refugees from all over the world. And, you know, that was kind of like against the law. And she was housing refugees in her home. And Arlene Bunsell, I'll never forget her. And here she was in her statewide position. And she was the one bringing, what's it called? Not homely, you know, there's a word for it, and I'm not doing well with words these days. I apologize. But she was providing shelter and care for refugees.
Thank you for sharing that, Jean. Well, we aren't going to be able to do everything with this policy right now, but we are actively trying to think through this and develop a policy that then we will submit to session and then share with the whole congregation. And so I don't think we'll spend too much more time today. I just wanted this to be a good introduction to the congregation and make sure that this was an effort that is supported by the congregation and not just something where, you know, session has a policy and we maybe announce it and then nobody reads it and then we just carry on. It should be something that's part of who we are. It's all part of our, you are welcome here. And just like when we did the LGBTQ, we're known for that. It's something that I think almost everyone who attends here would say that's something that we're proud of, is that we do, you know, maybe we don't do as much as we could, but it's something we all share and we believe and we act on it in various ways. So I'd like this to be similar, and including the things that Dan mentioned about all the other groups, but just to be a little bit more aware and savvy on that topic. Kirsten, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Maybe we do some signage like we did for the rainbow signage that we have.
And we actually got quite a bit of positive feedback when we had the Black Lives Matter banner on the church for a while. That was a statement that appealed and, you know, made a lot of difference. And people would drive by the church and they would see that and it would, you know, resonate with some people. You know, it's a dangerous time politically, and I'm sure we're all very aware of that right now, but it's also a time to have courage and a time to build bridges and to reach out to other people who might not have our privilege. So, and Dan, do you want to say something about books and the adult ed program here at the church? This is one of our topics, and so Dan can explain that, but we do think about social justice, and we often have study groups around these issues.
Yeah, I brought a few books to mention just in case you're looking for something to read on the subject of race. I want to start by saying that my favorite book title is a book I haven't gotten around to reading, but there's a book out there that's called When Affirmative Action Was White. And that's just one of those book titles to get you thinking. We have a whole United States history full of affirmative action for white people, but it's affirmative action for non-white people that gets people all riled up. And think about your ancestors that came over the Oregon Trail who are white, and they were getting free handouts from the government in the form of land, but we don't call that affirmative action. That's just, action. But try to do something specifically in the way of reparations for people of color, and you'll hear about it. So I brought some books. These are almost all books that we have read in our monthly book group, but not all. And 2 of them are actually in our library. I couldn't find any more books on race in the library. I think it must be because those of us in our book groups hold on to the ones on race because they're so good, and we want to reread them. The 2 that are in our library are Jamar Tisby, The Spirit of Justice. A lot of people read Jamar online. He's quite interesting, a black professor. And this one highlights the stories of a lot of people you've never heard of that played a role in civil rights movement or educating slaves, or just people, kind of some of the less prominent players in Black American history that he's researched and done a few pages about. They're quite interesting. Jamar Tisby, Jemartisby. He's easy to find on Substack. Lots of us read him, see him, his name go by there. We have Raphael Warnock's book, senator from Georgia, The Divided Mind of the Black Church. I think it was his PhD thesis, but it's about how the black church has historically been able to be at once a teacher and preacher of individual spirituality and discipleship, and at the same time, an advocate for a better society. And so many white Christians try to categorize those things. We can't talk about politics at church. Well, black churches talk about politics every Sunday. I'm sorry, it's part of the where they are in our society. Some others, I'm sure you've heard of a lot of these. I've got the 1619 Project. I've got Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, which talks about race as part of a caste system, like I was saying earlier. It's about who's better, who's not. She's a very successful author. She has a lot of personal stories about, trying to take her first class seat on an airplane and having people comment like, oh, what are you doing in first class? The Sum of Us by Heather McGee is a very good book about, she says, why we can't have nice things. It's about how over and over again, white America has chosen to deny themselves good things just to make sure that Black Americans can't also have them. About swimming pools that were closed rather than allowed to be integrated, that sort of thing. The Color of Law, we didn't read this one in book group, but we probably should. It's a study of how housing segregation in America has been a main linchpin of our racial problems in this country. And it's not just because banks and residents didn't want to integrate housing. It's because the government over and over again deliberately segregated people through FHA policies and other things that, and the effects of all that. I've got Ta-Nehisi Coates' latest book, The Message. it's Ta-Nehisi Coates. If you love him, it's a great book. It actually talks, he visits South Carolina, and he visits Palestine, and he visits Africa, and he talks about all three of those things and kind of weaves them together, and it's quite the ride. I guess, and then my last one, I guess the title says it all, is called How to Be Less Stupid About Race, by Crystal Fleming. And it's just sort of a handbook about things like some of the stuff the pastor talked about, microaggressions, and how to be, how not to do all of that stuff that they showed in the video. It's also quite an entertaining book, so I like that one. So if anybody wants to borrow any of these, I can loan out my personal copies as long as you promise to get them back, and or you can go look for them on your own.
Everyone for staying and sharing your thoughts with us, and keep talking.